The whisper before the storm. The year was 2037, but it felt like the last year the world might ever know. Silence had become a strange kind of alarm. Not the peace of resolution, but the pause before something ancient and violent returned. In the capital city of Larkin, a neutral zone carved out between decaying alliances, a man named Elias Wren stood on the balcony of his 10th-floor apartment, staring at the horizon like it might crack open. Elias, a former war correspondent turned history teacher, had lived through dozens of conflicts, but none felt like this. Global stock markets no longer bothered with recovery. Politicians didn't promise peace, they promised retaliation. People spoke in whispers, afraid even their breath might be tracked. The networks were fractured. The truth fractured even more. Across the world, two giants prepared to collide. The Dominion Pact, led by America, Israel, and Japan, blamed the Eastern Alliance, a fearsome coalition of China, Iran, and Russia, for a series of global cyberattacks that had paralyzed banks and blacked out city grids. But the Eastern leaders claimed innocence, pointing fingers at rogue AI cells and fabricated evidence. Everyone was lying, and everyone knew it. Elias wasn't alone in feeling the weight of the inevitable. His 17-year-old niece, Lena, recently orphaned in a missile test gone wrong, barely spoke anymore. She spent hours in the darkroom developing photographs, faces of strangers in crowded places, unaware they were being remembered. To her, memory was a form of protest, proof that people had lived. That morning, sirens had echoed faintly from the east. A satellite had reportedly been destroyed over disputed airspace, but the media channels refused to cover it. Instead, they played calming orchestras, as if string instruments could hold off a thermonuclear storm. Elias turned on his old radio, not for news, but for static. Comforted him more than speeches. Then came a voice, broken and low frequency, cutting through the noise. War is not a question of if. It's a question of how much we're willing to lose pretending we could avoid it. He didn't know where the transmission came from, but he wrote the words down. The next day, the borders would close. The sky would fill with drones instead of birds. But for now, the city exhaled quietly. And Elias, sipping cold coffee, made a silent vow. If this is truly the end, someone has to remember how it began. The fire that tore the sky. It began at 2:14 a.m., Coordinated Global Time. The sky above Larkin split. Not with thunder, but with silence that swallowed all sound. A shimmering pulse of light rolled across the stars, followed by a delay in the radio waves. Then the blackout. No power, no communication, and no warning. The destroyed satellite had triggered what analysts feared most. The Cascade Protocol, an automatic retaliation system embedded in Dominion and Eastern military codes. Every general had denied it existed. Every citizen hoped it didn't. But the sky told another story. Elias stood in the kitchen, staring at the lifeless light bulb above his head. Lena was already at the window, camera in hand, eyes wide. A dull red glow traced the edges of the horizon, like a dying sun had been reborn far too close to home. A voice erupted from a rooftop megaphone, broken by interference. All citizens remain indoors. This is not a drill. But it was already too late. Across the globe, strategic cities were erased in minutes. Tel Aviv vanished under a single seismic missile. A deep-sea warhead surfaced and struck Shanghai's southern coast. Washington, D.C., unprepared for the stealth aerial blitz, fell silent as comms died mid-broadcast. Larkin was untouched for now. Its neutrality saved it from direct fire, but not from collapse. The streets flooded with people clutching water bottles, duffel bags, crying children, and quiet prayers. Gas stations were deserted, already looted. Banks, empty. Only the military remained visible, lining intersections with expressionless masks and steel-plated vehicles. Elias tried reaching out to colleagues in Europe. Nothing. Deadlines. Jam signals. No voice except the rumble of boots and the sirens that had grown mechanical and weary. Lena finally spoke. "Uncle, do you think this is the end of everything?" He paused. Truth had become a luxury, but lies were poison. "No," he replied. watching the red cloud rise in the east. It's the end of what we thought everything was. Elsewhere, in a trench dug just outside the Iranian highlands, a young soldier named Arif Malik clutched his rifle. Originally deployed as part of India's neutral humanitarian forces, his convoy had been redirected after a Dominion drone strike wiped out their supply route. Now, stranded between two advancing fronts, he stared into the dark with fading hope and a bitter realization. Neutrality was a myth. The world wasn't at war. It was war. Every inch of airspace, every byte of data, every glance exchanged on the street carried the weight of violence. Arif whispered to himself. Maybe a prayer, maybe a warning. Ashes and alliances. The world had burned for 39 days. Entire capitals had vanished beneath clouds of ash. Satellites spun out of control. Time itself felt broken, as though history was looping through a slow-motion collapse. But amid the ruin, fragments of life persisted. Fractured, desperate, and clinging to instinct. Elias Wren had converted his apartment into a shelter for displaced civilians. Larkin, once a neutral city of diplomats and deals, now held thousands who no longer belonged anywhere. The school where Elias had taught became a ration depot. The library, once filled with history books, was turned into a morgue. Lena hadn't spoken in days. Her photos were now of shadows, broken glass, burnt shoes. Elias understood. Sometimes, recording the end was the only way to stay human. Outside the city, deep in the ravaged zone between Afghanistan and Iran, Arif Malik was alive. But barely. His unit had been decimated in a precision airstrike meant for a hidden bunker. The only survivor besides him, Lieutenant Hadiya Soraya, an Eastern Alliance pilot shot down during a surveillance mission. Her leg was shattered, her pride intact. They should have killed each other. But the war had stripped away ideology, leaving only hunger and the need to survive. "You speak like a soldier," Hadiya muttered, her voice dry. "But your eyes belong to someone who remembers peace." "I used to teach children," Arif replied, digging through debris for supplies. "Now I teach the sky how to bury them." In the quiet that followed, an unlikely alliance formed. Not of nations, but of people who had nothing left to defend except each other. Back in Larkin, Elias intercepted a military broadcast, coded, buried beneath static. The Black Code Protocol, a final contingency planted by both coalitions. If total defeat became imminent, hidden nuclear arsenals would detonate automatically. A failsafe disguised as justice. The code was being activated. Elias knew what it meant. A final erasure. No victors, no survivors, just silence and dust. But there was a catch. It required two key sequences, one held by each side. And someone had to physically input the second code. That gave the world a sliver of time. He scribbled the message and handed it to a courier drone headed east. No guarantee it would arrive. But he had no other weapon left. In the wasteland, Arif found a damaged Dominion communicator in a broken convoy truck. As he and Hadiya rewired it, the drone arrived, its message blinking in the dark. Code active. Countdown begun. Stop it or end begins. The world had collapsed under the weight of its own distrust. But in a bunker made of stone and sweat, two enemies looked at each other and chose to try. The silence that followed. The countdown had begun. 12 minutes to extinction. 12 minutes before the Black Code Protocol would ignite the last warheads buried beneath forgotten deserts and frozen oceans. Cities wouldn't fall this time. They'd vanish, along with language, legacy, and every name ever spoken aloud. Inside the wrecked military outpost, Arif Malik stared at the blinking interface, sweat dripping from his brow. Beside him, Lieutenant Hadiya Soraya gritted her teeth, pain radiating from her injured leg, her breath shallow but steady. "We don't have both sequences," Arif muttered. "We have Dominion's code, but not the Alliance's." Hadiya looked at him, not as an enemy but as a final mirror of what survival had cost them both. Slowly, she reached into her vest pocket, pulled out a blood-stained fragment of an encrypted key chip. "My squad was carrying it," she said softly. "We weren't told why, just that we'd know when it mattered." It mattered now. As they overrode the final layer of security, Elias Wren's voice came through the comm link. Barely audible, almost ghost-like. He'd rerouted the last civilian broadcast frequency in Larkin, hoping someone would hear. If you're listening, know this: what you choose in the next few moments will decide if there's a future left for memory to hold on to. Hadia leaned on Arif's shoulder as he entered the cancellation sequence. His fingers hesitated. One wrong digit could activate the failsafe instead. He looked up at her. "We're not saving the world," he said. "No," she replied. "We're just giving it a chance to save itself." He pressed the final key. The interface froze. Then a flicker. Code aborted. Global protocol halted. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They just sat in the silence. The first real silence the world had known in weeks. No sirens. No explosions. Just the wind sweeping dust through the cracked steel of a war bunker. In Larkin, Elias collapsed into a chair, relief wrapped in grief. Lena, holding her camera, captured the moment he closed his eyes. Not in fear, but in fragile peace. Across what remained of Earth, the news spread slowly, in whispers. The war hadn't ended with a treaty. It ended because two broken people refused to let it end the way it wanted to. A month later, Arif and Hadia stood at the edge of a shattered border. No longer soldiers, no longer symbols. Just survivors. They watched as humanitarian convoys arrived, carrying food, medicine, and, most important, people willing to remember rather than rebuild too quickly. Back in Larkin, Elias began writing